Catherine, and today I'm going to show you how to make ceremonial matcha. I have a Japanese tea shop in San Francisco, and I get asked this question pretty frequently, so I'm going to show you the tools and how to make a delicious bowl of matcha. You'll need 3 basic tools. The first is a bamboo tea scoop, or what's known as a chashaku in Japanese. You don't strictly need this. This is somewhat stylistic or used for cultural reasons. You can also just use a teaspoon or a sugar spoon, but the nice thing about this is that they're always made about the same size, and so you'll be able to get the right amount of matcha without having to use a gram scale. The second thing that you'll need is a matcha whisk. These are made of bamboo and traditionally made in Nara or Kyoto, Japan. They are handmade, and there's a long lineage of different families that made chasen or matcha whisks in Japan. If you are just getting started, you can also get one on Amazon. Look for one that has 80 strings or 80 tines. The more tines or these little whisk things that you have, the frothier your matcha will be. If you have a matcha sifter, that's great. You can also use a conventional kitchen strainer, and you'll use that to sift your matcha. And of course, you're going to need some ceremonial matcha. Whenever I'm making tea, whether it be green tea, oolong tea, or matcha, I always use filtered water. Even if your city's water is very clean, I've personally noticed a pretty large difference in both texture and flavor profile. Unless you have more specific brewing instructions, I usually recommend brewing green teas at 176 degrees. So the first thing that you'll do to prepare your matcha is to sift it to get rid of any clumps. The clumps are not a marker of poor quality or degrading quality. It just naturally happens to the powder. They like to clump together because of static electricity. Matcha is really finely powdered green tea. 2 to 3 scoops of matcha, or about half a teaspoon, would be the right amount for the type of matcha that we're making today, which is called usucha. Usucha is probably the matcha that you're most familiar with, where it has a layer of foam on top. There's another type of ceremonial matcha called koicha, where you use a lot of leaf or a lot of powder, very little water, and drink it like almost like a paint paste. I'm just going to sift the matcha, and while I'm doing that, I'll tell you a little bit more about matcha storage. You'll always want to store it in the fridge. You may have heard that before. That goes for all circumstances, whether you've opened the tin, broken the seal, or have just gotten it from a tea shop. Matcha is very fragile. It's susceptible to going stale very quickly, similar to how ground coffee starts to oxidize and go stale the moment that you grind the coffee. Matcha is the same way because it is powdered green tea, and so as a result it will go stale probably within a month. So I usually recommend that you can keep it in the fridge 6 to 8 months if it's unopened, but once you break that airtight seal, I would recommend drinking it in a month. It's going to taste the most fresh. It's not that it's unsafe to drink it, but it may have lost its aroma. It may be mostly bitter. Once you sifted your matcha, you're almost ready to start whisking. The last step that you need to do before that is to prepare the whisk. So you're going to pour that hot water that you already boiled over your matcha whisk, and that will soften the tines so that way they're less likely to break when you're whisking the matcha. You'll find that these handmade whisks from Nara or Kyoto, the bamboo is higher quality, and so the tines will be thinner and more flexible. In my opinion, it's kind of like, how committed are you to making ceremonial matcha? If you love it and you love the look and you love knowing that you're using a handcrafted tool, by all means go for that. Otherwise, there are less expensive tools that will get the job done. You'll pour out the water, which also warms up the tea bowl, and that helps the matcha stay at the right temperature while you're whisking it. Next, you'll add your tea powder, and this is the same sifted tea powder that you already made. If you were using a conventional strainer, this tea powder may already be in the tea bowl, in which case I would probably just prepare the whisk and warm the tea bowl before I start sifting the matcha. This was 2 to 3 scoops using a chashaku, or maybe half a teaspoon, or maybe 2 grams if you're using a gram scale. I'm next adding 65 to 75 milliliters of water. It's not very much, and you'll actually be able to drink it pretty quickly. So you can try using, let's say, 8 ounces of water. I personally don't like it very much. It just kind of tastes like vegetal, seaweedy water to me. But you're welcome to try that and see how you like that. I usually recommend starting with these parameters of 2 grams, 176, 65 milliliters of water, and then based on how you like that, you can adjust whether you want it to be thicker tasting, maybe use more leaf or less water. If you want it to be a little bit less bitter or a little bit milder, you can use more water. But regardless, it's up to what you prefer and what suits your palate best. Once you start whisking, you can see that I'm using my index finger and my thumb. What's not as obvious is that I'm only using my wrist. So rather than using your entire arm, keep your forearm right in place and just go back and forth using a lot of flexible wrist strength. I'm whisking in an M shape or a W shape. That is what aerates the tea in the water and also adds the foam on top. What I'm doing here is kind of a cross between a modern matcha practice that you can just do using everyday utensils and traditional tea ceremony or chado or sado. I myself am only a beginner. Typically matcha is drunk with a little sweet. And so you'll actually eat this sweet before you drink the matcha, so you don't combine the two of them. For what we're drinking, or usucha, you will eat what's known as a dry sweet or hikashi. These are little, almost Smartie-like candies that melt in your mouth, and they're mostly made of sugar, maybe a little bit of food coloring as well. But it's basically to cleanse the palate, prepare the palate with a little bit of sweetness, so that way it can counterbalance any bitterness or kind of earthy flavors that the matcha will have. Matcha on its own, because it is just powdered grass, is pretty grassy. It can be very savory. It is definitely an acquired taste. If you haven't had it before, it may even taste bitter or astringent depending on the grade of your matcha. But generally, bitterness and astringency aren't seen as poor qualities in Japanese tea. Good Japanese tea will have a balance of sweetness, umami, bitterness, and astringency. And so it just depends on the sort of matcha that you found and then your preference towards it. Because we use so little water, you can drink your matcha probably in 3 to 4 sips. Matcha is not the sort of drink that you want to savor over hours because since it is just suspended tea in water, the tea will sink to the bottom and it's not so great cold. That's it for today. I hope you learned something new. Owari!